Well, let's move on now. As I mentioned earlier, the Prime Minister will begin his 6-day trip to China this weekend, and defence experts are calling for him to tackle difficult topics during the visit. This includes making the case for the nation's plan to return the Port of Darwin to an Australian-controlled company, among other things. Joining me now to discuss this and more is Sky News host Rowan Dean. Rowan, good to see you. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Danica.
Look, the Prime Minister couldn't stand up to China when live fire drills were being conducted off our coast. He couldn't stand up to China during the multiple military near misses. The list goes on. So does the handsome boy from Australia have it in him to stand up to China this time?
Well, we shall see. But the Darwin Port, I would have thought the Chinese have got so much from Albanese, so little resistance to anything, that I would imagine that they are not concerned that he's going to be able to strong-arm them on the Darwin Port. Let's not forget that the Darwin Port was signed over by an Australian government quite happily, a Liberal government quite happily, and the Chinese would definitely want to keep it. But Albanese has done so much to make the Chinese happy. I mean, if you think about it, he didn't raise a finger when they were firing live armaments off our coast. A Virgin airline pilot had to be the only person, and seemed to be the only person in Australia, a bit like Dad's army, keeping a watch off the hills of Dover during the Second World War. A Virgin airline pilot was the only person who managed to see what was going on. And four visits to Xi Jinping. And what would really be thrilling the Chinese above and beyond anything else is what you were just talking about, is the fact that there is no relationship between the Australian government and the US government of any significance any longer. And I was interested, Danica, when you had Ted O'Brien was saying, oh, isn't it shameful that Australia hasn't prioritised its relationship with Donald Trump? Well, let's not forget, nor did the Liberal Party during the last election. The Liberal Party pushed Trump away. The Liberal Party with Peter Dutton was saying things like, oh, don't be worried, don't be scared, don't be frightened about Donald Trump, and got angry when Jacinta Price merely made the comment, let's make Australia great again. So for Ted O'Brien to be popping up and saying, oh, shameful the way Australia doesn't have a decent relationship with Donald Trump. I was saying on Sky and writing in The Spectator way back in December of last year, the first thing the coalition should be doing, then opposition, and now opposition should be doing, is jumping on a plane to America. And that's what all our politicians should be doing, particularly the government.
Yeah, look, you're spot on. That's a really interesting point. And I want to bring your attention to some comments made by the former Prime Minister Tony Abbott on Peter Credlin's show last night. He said that it's hard to know whether Anthony Albanese is more on the side of China right now or the United States. This is what he said.
It's hard to know whose side this government is on. Is the Albanese government more on the side of communist China, or is it more on the side of the country that's been the leader of the free world all these decades?
And Rowan, let's not forget, the Prime Minister gave that John Curtin oration at the weekend where he was very favourable to China but spoke about independence, clearly pushing at the United States there. But what do you make of those comments from the former PM?
Tony Abbott is a very diplomatic man, and he always phrases things in a very polite and diplomatic manner. There's no question what side this government's on. It's on the side of China. 4 visits, as I was just saying, no contact with the Americans, not a decent word to say about Donald Trump, glowing praise for China every 5 minutes, and it is clear this government, it is a left-wing government, it is a hard left government. The members of this government most of them were undergraduates at universities like Sydney and Adelaide, where they are mired and steep in anti-Americanism, pro-Chinese communism. Albanese himself was a hard left Sydney University leader, very favourable to the Communist Party, spoke at rallies against Israel. We are kidding ourselves if we think people suddenly just shed their skins and become something completely different to what they were all through the critical years, their critical educational formational years. We have a government who love communist China and don't like Israel and America. And the sooner the Australian people, I said before this election, last election in May, that this was the most critical election in Australia's post-war history. I said that repeatedly, and it was. And it is. We are suffering with a government that is not pro-American, that is alienating our closest ally, the ally that's given us all our security since World War II. We are, as you said, you mentioned the John Curtin lecture. That was a farce. Forget the fact that it was historically nonsense. But more importantly, to start suggesting that the Australian way is to walk away from America was a disgrace to every serviceman who were, our forces during World War II were under American Allied control, under the control of the American forces. That's how close we were. John Howard was called disparagingly by the left, of course, but I was actually proud of it, the deputy sheriff to the Americans. That's what we should be. We have the same values, the same shared history, the same democratic values in particular that the Americans have, and we should be proud of it, and we should be relying on them and looking to them and helping them. And when they say you've got to lift your defense spending to 3.5%, we should be saying, yes, actually, we're going to go to 3.6 or even 4, sir. That's how we should be behaving with the Americans, not mucking around, denigrating them, sneering at them, pretending we have some amazing independent Australian ways of security. What? Relying on Virgin Airline pilots to fly around the Pacific, telling us what's going on. It's a farce, and Australians have got to wake up very, very quickly, Danica. We are in very treacherous waters with this government, and they're making it worse.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Labor's not going to suddenly shed its ideals. A leopard never changes its spots, as they say. Rowan Dean, good to catch up with you. Thanks very much for joining me on the show this evening. Appreciate it.